On this episode of China Unscripted, we look at China's Xinjiang region, or East Turkestan. Billions of dollars worth of human hair, a slow-motion genocide, and why Muslim countries aren't doing anything. Welcome back to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
And joining us today is Arslan Hidayat, an Australian Uyghur rights activist who runs the most popular Uyghur-based Facebook page in English called Talk East Turkestan. He's also the General Secretary of the newly formed Uyghur Revival Association, an organization that sheds light on the Uyghurs' plight committed by the Chinese Communist Party. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be on your show. I've been a huge fan of you guys for many, many years, and I'm finally great to meet you guys.
Oh, thank you. I've been a big fan of Shelley for years as well. All right, so let's talk about the big news first. U.S. Customs agents just seized a shipment of 13 tons of human hair products. It was a shipment coming from China, and it's believed that the hair all belonged to Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So things aren't going well for the Uyghurs, are they?
Well, no. Obviously, you guys have reported many times on the organ harvesting issue. Obviously, if they're harvesting organs, then they're definitely shaving the heads off Uyghur women and profiting off it. We've heard figures, especially from Radio Free Asia. This market was around $100 million per year. This is how
For the hair?
Yeah, for hair. But this was, say, before the concentration camps. But once the concentration camps hit between 2017 and 2009, this market, they're making $1.8 billion off this now. And finally, we've got seizures. And, in the Uyghur culture, Uyghur women are not likely to just shave off their heads because hair is a big part of, some of the hair designs, or depending on how many locks each woman has, could tell whether the woman was married or not, or whether she's looking to get married. I mean, I'm not an expert on the hair, but it's a big part of the Uyghur culture in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan.
So it's not just a way to make money, it's also a way for the Communist Party to continue to annihilate Uyghur culture.
Exactly. And by former detainees, what they've said is they're literally, the women are made to put their heads into a hole, and the heads are just shaved, and they don't even see who's cutting the hair. So it's very akin to what happened in Nazi Germany. I mean, the death camps there were reports 10 years ago that came out. Various car manufacturing companies were involved in some of the Auschwitz death camps where the Germans were, or the Nazis were, selling the hair to various companies that still exist today.
I mean, $1.8 billion a year in hair, human hair, wigs, things like that. I mean, that's a huge moneymaker for the. Is the money going to prisons and things like that? Definitely.
I liken it to, for example, I mean, we've all seen those National Geographic documentaries where they educate the world on various tribal groups. When they hunt down an animal, they use every part of the animal. In this case, the CCP in these camps are not just profiting from the hair. Obviously, we've heard of the Halal organ harvesting issue, where they're profiting off every part of the body, not just the mind. And essentially that's what they're doing. They're literally playing tribesmen and just profiting every part. And the Uyghurs that are kept alive, that are able to be brainwashed, that are turned into essentially CCP mechanic robots, they're put into forced labor. So, and in the forced labor, in Radio Free Asia's report, in the forced labor, Uyghurs themselves are processing the Uyghur women's hair and then being sold off all around the world. That's literally kicking someone while they're down.
Wow, so it's the labor, it's the hair, and as you mentioned, the halal organ harvesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? I don't know if many listeners know.
So we are all aware, those that know the atrocities of the Chinese Communist Party for many years, especially in the 90s, the organs of Falun Gong practitioners were harvested, sold, profited from. Halal organ harvesting is where the highest bidders in the Middle East, so we're talking all your Gulf countries, they head over to China, and China are not hiding this. They literally have videos, and I've shared it on my Twitter as well. They've got hospitals catering to these essentially Arab Muslims, where they have, and we know for a fact that China for the longest time have been suppressing religion. So closing down of mosques, demolishing halal food. But when you go to these hospitals that deal with these people, there are mosques and Muslim canteens, halal canteens within hospital grounds. What happens is with these Middle Easterners, most of them Muslim, they do not want an organ from someone that has drank alcohol, eaten pork for most of their lives. Sickeningly, they want organs from Muslims, and they're literally given, like you would buy any product, like a 30-day money-back guarantee sort of thing. If that doesn't work, we'll get you another one. And we clearly saw this when concentration camp detainees are initially taken in. From the former concentration camp detainees that I've interviewed, they are given retina eye tests, their DNA is taken, their blood samples are taken on a daily basis. Especially for the female, sterilization, these fluids are injected into them. So these organs are sold to the Middle East, and these videos promoting this practice are actually on the internet, promoted by hospitals.
Are these hospitals in Xinjiang? Where are they?
No. They are in the main cities. So there's one Tongshan hospital, if I'm not mistaken. That's one in Beijing, and there is a woman in a gown, and she goes, look at this mosque that we have here. Look at these halal canteens. And that is a no-go. I have personally been to East Turkestan, and I've been to many hospitals within mainland China. So I've been to Beijing, Shanghai. I've never seen a mosque within, and especially mosques of that size within hospital grounds. And later they go on interviewing these Arabs from various countries in the Gulf, and they're very happy with the service. And these Chinese doctors can speak fluent Arabic, and it's really quite amazing because Arabic in itself, learning Arabic in East Turkestan is illegal. So it's amazing how they promote this to the Middle East and these Gulf areas.
I think the reason this is so damning is that, in the U.S. or other countries, it takes years to be able to find a organ for transplantation. In China, they're able to actually schedule it. And the fear is that it's because they have these large bodies of helpless people locked away that are being used as an organ bank. It was the Falun Gong for a lot of the past several decades. And now the Uyghurs are providing a pool of organs for, I guess, mostly Arabic nations.
I mean, do you know, is there, culturally in these Arab nations, is there a lot of organ donation, or is there a lack of organ donation? Like they would need to come to China to get these halal organs?
I'm not sure what the practice is amongst the Arabs. Generally speaking, from my experience, it's not a popular thing, let alone amongst Chinese people or amongst Arabs, but especially within the Uyghurs. It's even according to Chinese statistics. I mean, the numbers are really, really low for people that actually voluntarily donate organs, where you've actually got images at airports, specifically at Kashgar Airport, which is in the south of East Turkestan, where you've got priority lanes where it specifically says for organ, like to ship organs. Now you got to think to yourself, how many organs are coming out of that region where they've had to make a priority lane in airports? That I'm sure you've seen the arrow. There's a green arrow in Kashgar Airport, so it's really, really scary. I mean, that in itself shows the amount of organs that are coming out of the region.
Well, so halal, it comes from the Quran, and I'm guessing there's probably something in the Quran that says, you shouldn't kill other Muslims for their organs. Do you think the people who are on the receiving end of these organs, do they know what's happening?
I don't think so. technically, what is halal or haram? So halal means permissible, haram means not permissible. So generally, this has to do with food. This has to do with going into certain places, doing certain things. So for example, stealing is haram, not permissible. Giving charity is halal. So this is the general term. So the Chinese themselves, or it's not an official term, halal organ harvesting. It's a term that activists have coined up. It's just like Chai Nazi. It's what activists have coined up to kind of really get the masses talking about it. You know, have them shouting from the rooftops. And to be honest, if you're dying, and I'm not saying what they're doing is okay, but people that are dying and they have been waiting on the list and they're on the verge of dying, they might not think about where certain things come from. We've heard that ASPI a few months ago, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, named and shamed 83 global brands because they were either directly or indirectly involved in slave labor, forced labor, where Uyghurs are making our Nike tops, Apple iPhones, Samsung products. I mean, 83 global brands that we are all familiar with. So many of us actually don't know.
Yeah, one of the things that you talked about that really surprised me was the video of the woman talking about the mosque and the hospital and things like that and the great service, because I think after the organ harvesting issue started to gain some traction in the West, the Chinese Communist Party basically tried to play it down. Like they used to, publicly advertise on a lot of these hospital websites how much a liver cost or things like that, and they took all that stuff down. But it sounds like from what you're saying, they're pretty heavily advertising these things to these Arab nations. Is that currently happening?
Yeah, especially after the show, I'll actually send a link to that video. And for us to see Arabs to just come in and to be promoted that way, and mosques in the hospitals, mosques, for example, in East Turkestan, you are not allowed into a mosque. From Chinese leaked files, which were released almost a year ago, clearly said that they were targeting practicing Muslims. And now recently, we had a report by Adrian Zenz labeled sterilizations, forced abortions, and mandatory birth control, that was the number one reason why especially women were being taken into these concentration camps. So, yeah. So to see that in a government, because hospitals are essentially government buildings, to see that was really shocking, and for them to be speaking Arabic so freely.
Well, let's talk about some of your work. You're the General Secretary of the Uyghur Revival Association. What do you do?
So essentially, I mentioned this to you guys, and literally we've formed this organization. We only just got it passed last week. It's essentially what we're currently doing now, but so through the work we do on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. But now it's it's now legally recognized. So we basically raise awareness, educate people on what's happening, because still to this day, the Western governments have gotten on board, but still the people aren't really believing. I mean, you guys will probably have the same issue. They don't really believe what's happening there. Like, that can't be so. That you guys are taking it too far, because it's literally something out of a Hollywood movie almost. And especially to educate our Muslim brothers and sisters, because technically the Uyghurs are 99.9% Muslim. We do have non-believers, Christians, and other people that believe in various other faiths. But for them not to step up, and recently we saw again at a UN Consulate General meeting that 46 nations, most of them Muslim majority countries, supporting China's policies against the Uyghur Muslims of East Turkestan. So this is, I still believe we are at an education stage, which is very sad. Well, we really need the people to wake up. And to be honest, within high-level rankings, say, government officials across the world, I believe that the Uyghur issue is the only issue in the world where it's actually united the left and the right, because people on the left and the right both hate Nazis. And this is literally what we're dealing with. Modern day 21st century Nazis on steroids, because, you know, Hitler didn't have the technological power that Xi Jinping has in his hands. And this is just, you know, Nazi 2.0, China Nazi, whatever you want to call it. It's crazy.
I mean, when you start talking about the news about the sterilizations and the abortions coming out, the organ harvesting, it becomes very hard to not say, well, I mean, it's obviously a genocide, according to the definitions put forth by, you know, government bodies and NGOs and things like that. But you think it's not really recognized that way by just like Muslims in Muslim majority countries.
Exactly. According to the Geneva Convention in Article 2, it specifically mentions that this does fall under genocide, because it says this China has been imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group of people, and also the forcible removal of children and putting them into boarding schools or giving them to another group. And when you look at the study done by Dr. Adrian Zenz, I do hope you get a chance to interview him, where he will go through all the stats and statistics, which are from Chinese government websites, from the Xinjiang Regional Health Commission, from family planning budgets and reports from government websites, together with witness testimonies. I mean, some of these women say that they were forced to have IUDs put in them after they had second or third children, and if they had more children after that, that they were fined upwards $2,500–3,000, which is, you know, for some people that's a year's or 2 years' salary, what many can't afford. And if they do fall pregnant, the government authorities don't care how far along you are in your pregnancy. They will abort your child. 1, 2, 3 months, 7, 8, 9 months. They don't care. These women, what they've been told, especially in the camps, where they are injected with an unknown fluid or given pills that it's just like, you eat it. If you don't, you get beaten. And at night, their blood is constantly checked. And even after, for example, there is one woman, and you can Google her name. She's quite, her name is mentioned a lot as one of the giving lots of witness testimonies out of the camps. Zumrat Dawood, who spent 62 days in those camps, she said she had to go to these free gynecology exams just to make sure that she wasn't pregnant. And if she was, that she'll be put in the camps, or if she didn't attend those gynecology exams, that she'll be put in those camps as well. And after while she was in the camp, apparently from her testimony, she went through surgery and her fallopian tubes or her uterus was taken out. And Global Times came back basically with, no. She had myosomia. She had something like a growth in her uterus. That's what that surgery was for. So we can only assume that this is happening to millions of women, because according to Dr. Adrian Zenz, 80% of the Uyghur population, and our population numbers vary. According to the CCP, we are about 11–12 million. According to Uyghur rights or Uyghur dissidents, we believe anywhere between 20 to 35 million. Obviously, it's difficult to work out because we cannot carry out our own census. So we're talking not just hundreds of thousands, we're talking about millions of women here.
Well, I mean, what's really sickening about a lot of what you just said was, China gets so much press when they did things like, oh, it's no longer the one-child policy. They've gotten rid of the one-child policy. Or, they might open up births. But, like, a lot of the things that you're talking about, the forced sterilizations, the putting in IUDs, the fining people, several times their annual salary for having children, these are all things that were originally put in place through China's, so-called family planning policy, their one-child policy, and to see them, like, it's obviously from what you're saying, just as bad as it ever was, and also now targeted at a minority population in China. And I cannot even tell you, I am getting chills right now. This is so, like, terrible and enraging.
Yeah, what's scary is, I mean, you could understand if it was just witness testimonies, but this is from the CCP's own mouth, so to speak. So that's what's really scary. When the CCP actually, essentially support what the former detainees are saying. That's what's scary about this report, and that's why it's gotten a lot of headway. And you've got Secretary Pompeo, you've got IPAC in the UK, you've got everyone talking about this, and they're labeling this demographic genocide, this very slow genocide that's happening. And essentially, as we mentioned, these camps are used to basically turn Uyghurs into abiding Chinese citizens. I mean, Uyghurs, for example, don't go out and commit terror. Like, we are not terrorists. And if you look at the report and if you talk to these former detainees, they are literally made to chant at these camps that they are not to have, like, I will not have a third child, or I will not have a third child. If I have another child, this means I am not educated, or I am uneducated. I'm paraphrasing what one of the former detainees have said, and so or like, I'm uneducated and I'm a terrorist, and so they believe that Uyghurs breed terrorists. Every baby that is born is a terrorist, and according to Adrian Zenz, our birth rate in the last 3 years is barely above zero.
Wow. Now, you mentioned terrorism, but according to our favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, your Facebook group is in fact run by terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I'm a terrorist, how come the country I'm from, Australia, the current country I'm working in, Bahrain, and the country that I'm residing in, Turkey, have not charged me with anything, have not suspected me of anything. I have not been even called in for a meeting by any authorities. So if that were the case, I'm happy to be, investigated, take my laptop, do what you need to do. But not even that idea has popped up in them. And if I were, you wouldn't have mainstream media sources inviting me to talk about the Uyghur issue. Simply Googling my name, and the people that have come onto my show, because on Talk East Turkestan, I've invited Balu Tal, I've invited Ethan Gutman, I've invited Adrian Zenz, I've invited Anders Kaur. These people would not affiliate themselves with terrorists.
Well, don't you think, to be fair, you should really go to China and go through a trial in Chinese courts?
Well, not with their 99% conviction rate.
But I mean, criticizing the Chinese Communist Party, that itself is a dangerous thought crime.
Well, exactly.
As Hong Kong found out.
And you guys have seen, not even in Hong Kong now, you see people, holding up white pieces of paper because they are absolutely afraid. You see activists like Joshua Wong stepping down from their organizations. And if that's going on in Hong Kong, and you see the people of Hong Kong quote or talk about what's happening to the Uyghurs, they say yesterday or today it's the Uyghurs, next it's us, and next it could be the world. And to an extent, this CCP virus, this Xi virus, has somewhat in effect locked us in our homes, and to an extent we are feeling a little bit of that pinch. A tiny bit of that pinch, what the Uyghurs are going through. I mean, obviously, we cannot compare our own homes to modern-day concentration camps, but it's something for people to think about.
Yeah, they've already started taking DNA samples from Hong Kong protesters, so that's great. So I think another aspect we should talk about is not just like genocide as we know it, but that it's also a cultural genocide that's going on in Xinjiang.
So you guys understand that China loves to boast about their 56 minority ethnic groups, and that these 56 ethnic groups make up one China. that's on show. So the Chinese governments or the CCP, they love the way that we dress. They love our food. They love
They love your dancing.
These sort of entertaining parts of the culture, but everything else that makes us different, our language, our religion, our our ideology, like general cultural ideology, and there is nothing to suggest that we are that the Uyghur people are out to separate themselves or committing this terrorism, and a picture, sharing a picture, talking slightly negatively or complaining about a party official, you're immediately put on trial or arrested for treason. And I'm thinking, how weak is the CCP? If you were to just criticize a party official just slightly, you're suddenly enemy of the state number one. I mean, can you imagine the amount of treason trials you would be having right now in the United States if that was the criteria for treason?
I mean, all of Twitter would be gone.
Exactly.
Would that be a bad thing?
It's just that, like, China, even though the second strongest superpower, they are really, really weak in a sense, because you're literally clamping down on individuals for putting extra gas in your car from last week. You'll because their technological apparatus has gotten to such a level where they track every bit of your life. Whoa, how come you used $50 extra this month on your electricity than last month? What's going on there? And so this is how they catch people, say, fasting during the month of Ramadan, because generally Muslims would have to eat during the night so that they can sort of fast during the day. And so many Uyghurs have been caught because of the rising electricity bills during that month. And they can't even prove that people were fasting. It's just they assume so because your electricity bills were $20 or $30 more than last month.
Well, I mean, there's an easy way to catch people fasting. You just, send Communist Party officials to go live with people, with the Uyghurs, and that way they can directly spy on their families.
Well, it's not just Ramadan. That's exactly what happens. You can literally find this. It's very well covered. 1.1 million Chinese CCP officials sent to Uyghur homes to essentially spy on them. How do they eat? Do they eat with their right hand? Because in Muslim traditions, you are supposed to eat with your right hand. So they'll ask you, why are you eating with your right hand and not your left hand? They check to see what language you speak at home. And there have been many cases where these CCP officials have ended up raping the women, because initially, when these officials were sent into homes, most of the Uyghur males were already in the camps. So you had the wives of the male detainees at home with their children. Children were raped. 12, 13, 14-year-old girls fell pregnant, ended up committing suicide. I mean, this is all very well documented. And Zumrat Dawood, when I interviewed her, she was telling me about this ethnic, social harmony, brotherhood, sisterhood policy that they had with the Uyghurs. So every Uyghur had to have a Chinese relative, and they had to be the opposite sex. So if I'm a Uyghur, my Chinese relative had to be a female. If I'm a female, my Chinese relative had to be a male, and they would need to bond every so often, whether the Han family would come to live with the Uyghur family and vice versa. And Zumrat Dawood's daughter, she's a 12-year-old. She was partnered with a 22-year-old soldier, a male soldier, and she would be that male soldier would call, well, it's our day tomorrow. I'll be picking your daughter up from school. Don't wait up. Can you imagine your 12-year-old daughter is being picked up by a male? God knows what's going to happen. And she lived with that. Eventually, she got out. She didn't have to deal with that because, from what she told me, that she came up with various excuses not to have her daughter go with him, whether it was she was being sick or various other excuses. So that's really sickening, and it's been well documented. It's not just hearsay or fantasy that's coming out of my mouth. It's true.
I mean, I think one thing that's so interesting about how these crimes against the Uyghurs is playing out is in the international community. Like, most people don't think Donald Trump defender of Muslims, but you see the Trump administration being way more vocal than Muslim majority countries who are actually defending China. What is happening in this world?
Exactly. Many people. This is, I believe, why many Muslim countries or Muslims don't take up on the Uyghur cause, because again, what's been happening to the Uyghurs did not just start with the concentration camps. This has been going on not just from when the CCP came in to Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. And I'll just give you guys a bit of history. The reason why we call it East Turkestan or Chinese-occupied East Turkestan is because we did have established governments before 1949. We had one in 1933 to 1934. It wasn't long-lived, called the East Turkestan Islamic Republic. And then further from 1944 to 1949, called the East Turkestan Republic. And even before that, we had various issues with Chinese nationalists. Before that, under the Qing dynasty, which gave us the name Xinjiang, which just means new land, new frontier. And we see this as a colonialist name. That's why you would hear me constantly refer to as East Turkestan, because that's the name that we prefer. And so this is another way to stamp out the Uyghurs, because the Uyghurs simply being there is a proof that we are not Chinese, or we are not essentially, loyal to the CCP, and living our culture, living our religion, shows proof to that, because many foreigners that ended up going to East Turkestan many years ago realized that, guys, they would question, is this really China? Because when you actually go, I'm not sure if you guys had the opportunity, it really does not look like the rest of China at all, because it's not. It is occupied land, and that's the next step we're trying to take. It is that we need the CCP to stop occupying it and leave, because and Hong Kong have realized that.
Right. I mean, I'm pretty sure Xinjiang, which means new territory, means it's been part of China since ancient times.
Yeah, well, that's what they think. And the practice of what's really funny is they'll get a bunch of coins, or they'll get a jacket, or they'll get a shoe, bury it deep down in the ground, and they'll dig it up and go, hey, look, we found this Chinese coin. It's dated back 2,000 years. It must have always been part of China. And the Uyghurs themselves are Turkic people. And last year, when China released the white paper document, China states that, no, the Uyghurs are not Turkic, but Chinese. But historically, the whole world knows, especially the Turkish Republic, like present-day Turkey, the foreign minister came out and said, China, like, we have foreign relations with you, but you can't go out and say the Uyghurs are not Turkic. We are Turkic, and because I reside in Turkey, and I've seen Turkish history books that are taught to the children, and it talks about the Uyghur Devleti, or the Uyghur state from 1,000 years ago. It talks about East Turkestan, and it says Turkish people, present day Turkish people in Turkey, came from Turkestan. Geographically, that's where they came from. So for them to make such blatant historical, to make fallacies like that, really, just goes to show how fake, not just how fake Chinese news is, but how fake Chinese CCP history is.
So what's funny is, the official name of the region is the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. But like the only part of that that's not a lie is that it's Xinjiang, new territory.
Well, it's actually interesting that you bring up their whole kind of historical revisionism thing, because when my mother was a child in China, she remembers very clearly this like a Xinjiang mummies exhibit that was touring the country at the time because they had excavated some like preserved bodies from that area, and it was a completely different culture. The dress, like, you know, the braids of the hair that was still, you know, on the bodies was yellowish. So it was like a huge like novelty for people to come and see these, you know, like obviously from a different ethnic culture. And my uncle went to Xinjiang in the 80s and took all these photos, and it was like, oh, you know, here's this like people definitely, if not, they didn't necessarily treat it as like a foreign country, but they treated it as like, here's a different ethnicity. Like, here's, you know, this is not like a Han Chinese region. So it's interesting to see, even in the last, you know, 30, 40 years, how they've changed how they talk about the area, as well as, you know, sending more and more Han Chinese into Xinjiang, just like they did with Tibet, so that, you know, you can't really separate it anymore because you know, they're trying to take over the dominant culture.
Exactly, and I'm happy that you mentioned that. When Chinese tourists would come, I'm not sure if they come anymore, but when they would come, and when I used to go to East Turkestan, and when they would walk in their groups, I would hear them say Uyghur, Uyghur, which means foreigner. And whenever I went to, say, Beijing, Shanghai, or when Uyghurs go to Beijing, Shanghai, or the other parts of China, they would literally say, they would point to the Uyghurs as Uyghur. They saw them as foreigners because physically, like, they're not the same. And now we talked about, you know, sterilization and abortions and all this, but forced marriages. This is another level where the Uyghurs. You guys know that within Chinese culture, because of the one-child policy, Chinese families generally opted for boys because they would bring, economy, that they would work on the fields, and this is what would happen. So I don't have to explain to you guys, but there is a decline in females amongst the Chinese population, and because of that, these hardworking Chinese soldiers or officials, they would be rewarded with their Uyghur brides. They would literally go out and pick out the brides that they wanted. Many Uyghur women are actually signing up to get married to Han Chinese, forcibly signing up, because if they don't, their families would be put into camps. Because the question is, if such a request is made to you and you decline, the question is, why are you declining? What's the difference between a Chinese man and a Uyghur man? Now, I'm all for marriages between cultures. I have no problem with that, as long as no one is forced, whether it be the male, whether it be the female. But when you have forcing of people getting married, this is a no-go. And this is another way for China, another way of trying to erase the Uyghur identity. And they're essentially, to break it down, they want to erase any trace of Uyghurness within East Turkestan so that they can essentially take it over. And you're right. Even though it's named the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, there is nothing autonomous about it. We don't have any autonomy in choosing our leaders. Our Uyghur leaders are CCP puppets. They themselves have no control, or they don't have the power to truly govern. Kind of like Carrie Lang. And if they step out, and they don't really need to step out, even our CCP officials, Uyghur officials that have towed the line for 30 years, for example, like Nur Bekri, he was put into he's been sentenced to, I forget how long, and his crime, tax evasion. That's what they love, that term, tax evasion or corruption. So we now know that regardless of how loyal you are, you will be sent just because you are Uyghur. Like my father-in-law. My father-in-law is a famous actor and comedian, the likes of Jim Carrey. He studied at the Xizhi, which is the drama academy in Beijing. Now, according to my father-in-law, back in the mid-80s, the Xizhi, the drama academy, and the Yingyi, the conservatorium of music, were in one building. Guess who was studying in the same building with my father-in-law? Peng Liyuan, Xi Jinping's wife. So I've written many times about this, where how come my father-in-law was put into a concentration camp for 10 months and she wasn't? Weren't they studying in the same institution? I mean, my father-in-law has worked for the CCP for 30 years. And he's never broken a law in his life. So this notion of, we are educating the Uyghurs, we are uplifting the Uyghurs. I'll just tell you some of the people that are put into these camps. You've got university professors, doctors, millionaires, business people, footballers, singers, actors. I mean, you've got a wide range of people that had sturdy jobs, people who are on the verge of retirement or had already retired in these camps. So this notion that the Uyghurs are dumb or they are wanting to commit terrorism, they need to be educated, they need to be given jobs. Well, Uyghurs were okay, with their business and everything, and yeah.
Is your father-in-law okay now?
Yes, my father-in-law is out, but he cannot contact us because contacting anyone, just like former detainees have told us once they've left China, that contacting anyone abroad is in itself a crime. Using a VPN is a crime. So, yeah. And the only reason how I know he's out, do you know how I know?
How?
Because he's famous, people use the Chinese app Douyin. Mm-hmm. So people were sharing his images here and there. That's the only reason how we know he's out, because people were sharing his stuff on Chinese social media. And we cannot contact, obviously you guys know that no Facebook, no Instagram, no WeChat even. So
on the Chinese version of TikTok, you could see people filming your father-in-law.
Yes. And constantly I get messages, sent through my WhatsApp or Signal. Hey, someone shared something of your father-in-law from Douyin here. Here's another one. So it looks like he's doing okay. The first images that came out. Now, my father-in-law, if you guys looked at the article I sent you, he's quite a big man. And when he came out, clearly he had lost at least 20, 30 kilos. I've never seen him so skinny in my life. And now he's kind of at, a reasonable weight. He's kind of back to what he was, but it was really scary seeing him for the first time on social media.
Wow, Xinjiang concentration camps, a great way to lose weight.
Oh, God.
So one thing I think is really interesting about what's happening to the Uyghurs is that, in a way, none of this is new. You talk about the sterilizations, the forced abortions, that's the one-child policy. You talk about sending Han Chinese into the regions and kind of taking over it. That happened to Tibet. Even the organ harvesting, that was Falun Gong.
Or, religious, anti-religious brainwashing kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so it seemed like the Communist Party is just taking all of the tactics that it's used over its many decades of authoritarian rule and have applied it to Xinjiang. And this has just made it very visible, but no one should think that this is something new in China. Exactly.
And the Chinese migration didn't only happen to Tibet. It's been happening in East Turkestan, especially since 1995, where there was a ploy just before China got into the WTO for the Chinese to move to the West. It's vast. It's not as crowded as the rest of China. All the educational opportunities, job opportunities, bank loans go to the Chinese. Double the wages. And in 2009, and I'm wearing my black tie today because 2 days ago, on the 5th of July, 2009, 11 years ago, what we know now today as the July 5th Urumqi massacre, that's essentially what I like to label as the Uyghur version of Tiananmen Square, where according to figures from Uyghur rights activists, upwards of 10,000 people disappeared. And the 7th of the 7th was when what looked like to be Han Chinese people and hitting the streets and attacking Uyghurs, you had they were actually plain-clothed army and police personnel going out and slaughtering Uyghurs with batons and beating them to death. And so today marks the 11th anniversary of that. And obviously the Uyghurs do not get as much hype or recognition of this day. 1989 happened, and then 20 years later, Tiananmen Square happened in East Turkestan. So I just wanted to raise that because it doesn't get enough recognition.
I mean, I remember at the time covering China news stories, and it was so frustrating to have that story because the only information we could get outside of China about it was really from Chinese state-run media. And, there wasn't as much social media and things back then. So the official story was that there were riots in Urumqi where Uyghurs were attacking Han Chinese with knives, and this was used as the reason to lock down the region for months, to cut off the internet, to do all these things. And at the time it was impossible to know what was really happening in there. So for you to talk about tens of thousands of people were killed by Chinese authorities, I think that's still a story that most people don't know about, because at the time there was no way to get that out. And it's looking back at that and thinking, well, you didn't want to call it riots or but that's the only thing that's the only information that you could get.
Essentially, the story goes that on June 26, 2009, in a town called Shouguan in Guangdong, Uyghur workers were essentially, according to the news, 118 Uyghur workers basically disappeared, killed. And that number could be far more. So this happened June 26, 2009, and this happened because a disgruntled worker said that some Uyghurs had sexually harassed some Chinese women. But this was said to be false allegations, even from Xinhua News. So according to Chinese state media, this allegation that Uyghur men harassed Chinese women, they said, even Chinese state media said that this was false. The next 10 days, videos of that incident, and it's very brutal, where Chinese were attacking these Uyghur kids. So when we're talking about the Uyghurs being, not just the Chinese being, lured into going to East Turkestan, but Uyghurs are made to go to work in Chinese factories, because we all know that Chinese labor is cheap, but Uyghur labor is cheaper. And so these factories would opt for Uyghur workers. So many Chinese would lose their jobs as well. So in the next 10 days, this was going all over social media. Petitions were sent to the government, look into this, investigate this. Obviously, we know that China loves to cover up these issues, saying that only 2 people died, according to their media. And then on the July 5th, I've spoken to people that were there at the protest. I've interviewed them. They said they came out with nothing. They didn't have anything in their hands, and it was a peaceful protest. The most that they did was walk around on the street and sit in the main square in Urumqi. From there, they literally sat on their bottoms, and from there they were met with bullets. And because many people were killed in front of their eyes, onlookers, and it was quickly shared, people messaging each other. Although back then there was no real WeChat. It turned into riots. But that wasn't long-lived, because the PLA was in there straight away. Many Uyghurs disappeared. The internet for that next whole year was cut off. I remember we couldn't even call them with I couldn't call relatives with international phone cards. And so this 10,000 number had come up from the World Uyghur Congress, which is not a terrorist organization, despite what the Global Times have said. And its leader at the time, Rabia Kadir, you may have heard of her. And according to her sources, 10,000 Uyghur youth had disappeared. And from then on, for the next 5-6 years or so, you had what we believe to be false flag operations, attacks happening here and there, trying to paint to the world that the Uyghurs are terrorists. And then during that time, especially 2014, you had the Chinese regime, build its relations with countries in the Middle East, the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia into luring them to invest money into their classic One Belt, One Road project. And when we had MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the current leader of Saudi Arabia, go there, he praised Chinese policy. He praised the concentration camps. And we Uyghurs were thinking to ourselves, hold on, Mohammed bin Salman, you have a beard. I assume you pray 5 times a day. I assume that you fast. You would be a perfect candidate for one of those concentration camps.
And yeah, like you mentioned, for example, the Kunming knife massacre that was blamed on Uyghurs. We did an episode about that, and there were some very suspicious things in that. The story didn't quite add up.
And let's just say, for argument's sake, they were terrorists that happened to be Uyghur. Why are you locking up a whole population? You've got millions in concentration camps and the other millions of people in an open-air prison. And I'm sure if they had the space, they would lock up every single Uyghur in that region, for sure.
I mean, you mentioned the Muslim countries. I wonder if you have seen any of the types of propaganda that the Chinese Communist Party uses to justify the concentration camps to these countries.
Perfect example. I want you guys to share this. Hashtag Xinjiang Propaganda. We know for a fact that Uyghurs do not have access to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all these social media apps. Recently, there has been a phenomena, not just Global Times and China Daily and People's Daily, showing the world, how great Xinjiang is, but now you have Uyghurs. You have Uyghurs on Twitter, and their location is written as Xinjiang in the Uyghur Arabic script, and they are tweeting in Arabic. And I mentioned before, you guys can look this up. The Arabic language, speaking it, knowing it, even English. You cannot learn these languages in East Turkestan unless you are someone that's going to promote the CCP. Because if you learn Arabic, means you have access to the Noble Quran. If you learn English, it means one day, if you do end up leaving, or if journalists end up coming, that you'll speak to those journalists and they'll get your story. And so now there's a phenomenon on Twitter, and Twitter have actually banned some of these accounts where Uyghurs come up with Uyghur names. They look Uyghur. They are tweeting in the Arabic language, not just English. So they would retweet stuff from Global Times, People's Daily, Chinese Daily, and put an Arabic tweet on it. So that's what's been happening.
A little suspicious, I'd say.
Yeah, I was just wondering how they justify it, because I've seen some of the propaganda that they use in Chinese and English to justify the concentration camp, and a lot of that is like scare tactics using, like what happened in Urumqi in 2009, or a couple of bombing incidents in the 90s where they claim that, all of these people are terrorists and we need to make it safe. But I was wondering if that is the same kind of thing they do to, the Arabic countries, or is it a different message?
From what I understand your question, from what I've seen, it's basically, no, fasting isn't banned. Look at all these Uyghurs fasting. Prayer isn't banned. Look at all these Uyghurs praying. And we've recently had in the past couple of months, some top Arab, Turkish, and various other scholars or Islamic figureheads visit East Turkestan, and they are put into these hotel rooms, staged obviously, and when they go into these hotel rooms, guess what's inside those hotel rooms? Prayer mats, the Noble Quran, and I don't know if you know, but the Uyghurs or Muslims, pray towards Mecca, and so even that is outlined for them in their hotel room, saying this is the direction to Mecca. And when these scholars went in there, they were like, oh my God, this doesn't even exist in our own countries, because some of these scholars come from countries like Egypt, where it's not necessarily the Islam is not promoted because of what's happened there, with the Muslim Brotherhood. But yeah, so they are fooling. And so when these Islamic famous figures go into East Turkestan and then leave and go back to their own countries, what are they going to say? They don't know that it's been staged, because they themselves come from oppressive regimes, and they don't know any better.
So it's the happy Tibetan ploy, basically.
Everything old is new again.
Oh my God.
So I think we're almost about out of time. I just want to have there's one other question I need to ask. Why is the Chinese Communist Party so interested in Xinjiang, East Turkestan?
We are literally the Dubai in Central Asia. Gold, oil, coal. You talk about natural resources, we've got them. We'd literally be like the Arab Emirates. We'd have helicopters in our backyards and all these natural resources. China wouldn't be China without East Turkestan. I mean, 80% of China's cotton. So most likely, if you got a T-shirt made in China, the cotton most likely came from slave labor, most likely came from Uyghurs. It's strategic location. We border with 9 countries. You've got Tibet to the south, Mongolia, obviously China, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia to the north strategically. And we literally make up 1/6 of China as well. I could go on all day why they're so interested. It's such an important piece of land.
Well, and of course, the cheap labor.
And cheap labor. But the end goal for China is to, whatever Uyghurs do end up surviving this modern day, what I like to call Uyghur Holocaust or Muslim Holocaust, because that's exactly what I believe it is. The ones that do survive would be on the outside, they'll look like Uyghurs, but inside they'll be Chinese. And eventually through forced marriages. I mean, this is very similar to my own country, Australia. Between the years 1910 and 1970, for 60 years, Australia too had concentration camps, but not to the scale of China. And they did also have, they did also steal Aboriginal children brought up in white Christian homes. Aboriginal women, men, married off to each other. And so they call this dark period in Australia the stolen generation. So we've got this is the Uyghur stolen generation. And if we don't act soon, we will not have the Uyghurs in a couple of decades' time, or at least the Uyghurs as we know it today.
Well, that is pretty grim. So for anyone listening who wants to know more about you or learn more about the Uyghurs and what's happening in China, where should they go?
Please, you guys can follow me on Twitter at @Arslan_Hidayat. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Ad Talk East Turkestan, all one word. We do have a website for the Uyghur Revival Association, URA, but it's currently in construction. As I mentioned, we've literally just formed this organization. And once that's up and running, that is Uyghur, UYGHURRA.org. That's where you guys can find us.
Hold on. Should we be spelling Uyghurs UI or UY?
UY. Most of the mainstream media use UY because I believe that's currently in the dictionary, or they use some sort of reference for that. But if you look at the Uyghur, we say Uyghur, that's the proper way, but the Uyghur Human Rights Act, Policy Act, that is spelt with a UYGHUR, and that has recently passed into law in the United States of America. So there is a law with the name, not UYGHUR, but we can't seem to be getting it through to mainstream news media outlets. I hope you guys use the UYGHUR.
I think we can make that change. And I'm glad you brought up the Uyghur Act that came out, because that's a huge step forward. That's the U.S. government saying they can use the Global Magnitsky Act to actually sanction Chinese officials involved in what's happening in Xinjiang, East Turkestan. So that's a huge deal.
Well, we hope so. On paper, it's very, very promising. We do hope the United States, as well as other countries, jump on board. But, similar acts, similar bills, similar laws have been passed for Hong Kong, for Tibet. It really hasn't worked out for Hong Kong. So I believe that not just the United States, the whole world needs to get on board. And we can't have countries supporting modern day 21st century genocides, modern day 21st century holocausts. We can't be supporting modern day 21st century Nazis like Xi Jinping. People really need to get on board, and people need to ask themselves which side of history they want to be on, with Nazis or with people that, are calling for freedom and justice and democracy.
Communist Nazis. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. That was very, well, it was horrible. It was really, really awful.
Please come back.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me, and just giving, this is what I do. I just raise voices, whatever platform I can. And yeah, thank you so much. And I love the work that you guys do.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I was serious when I said that was awful. Every moment of that was awful.
I mean, I started to get so upset when he was talking about the forced sterilizations, and
I mean, anyone who still thinks that the Chinese Communist Party is good or that they have a better system there just needs to listen to this podcast and be slapped a couple of times. And I volunteer to do the slapping.
I think what's especially tragic about what's happening to the Uyghurs is, like we talked about, it's the Tibetans, the Falun Gong, the Christians, every previous ethnic group, it's all there.
Yeah.
And nobody said anything, or not nobody said anything, but
it was Wall Street being like, hey, we gotta make some money.
Nobody was able to stop it before, and so it's they just keep going. And after the Uyghurs, it's Hong Kong, and
they're well on their way with Hong Kong. After Hong Kong, it's Taiwan, then India.
But it'll never happen to us.
Hey, good point. I'll stay silent. I say after the end of an hour-long podcast. Whoops.
It's just...
I'm upset about the cotton. Because I'm thinking, I don't know where the cotton for my shirts is picked from. Even if the shirts are made in the USA, or now more likely, Nicaragua, Bangladesh. If the cotton is from Xinjiang, then the cotton is being picked by people who could be potentially slave labor. And so you have all these massive supply chains, and I feel like I have no control over it, and maybe I just should never wear a shirt again.
Well,
I'm in favor of that.
Cut.
I disagree. Hey, thanks for watching China Unscripted.
I was going to make a good point about the shirts, though.
All right, make your good point.
Well, just Nike and Adidas recently got in trouble for this.
Yeah.
The fact that a lot of their goods were made in Xinjiang. And it's not just cotton being picked. It's any of these things being made, processed, clothing items, a lot of them come from Xinjiang. But also, now as they ship more and more of these former concentration camp people into factories across China, which is very much being done right now, you can't really justify buying anything from China, really.
Yeah. Needs to be a boycott.
Yeah, and I hope that companies start pulling out, because it's very hard for consumers to find items not made in China. Even if you want to boycott China, you want to buy a toaster, and you can't find one that's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
95% of shoes are made in China. So how do you get out of this? It really, we as a culture, and hopefully the U.S. government, puts enough pressure on the companies to actually fundamentally change their supply chains, because that's the only way that consumers can even have that choice.
Because it's really hypocritical for these companies to be, so vocally talking about racial justice in the United States, but then have everything made with slave labor by Uyghur Muslims.
Right. It's a racial genocide, essentially, what the Communist Party is doing.
Yeah.
I think also, though, a lot of companies don't know.
I mean, at this point, do you think you can really argue ignorance?
I've actually heard of, and I can't talk about this on the record, but I have heard of...
We're not recording right now.
But I have heard of cases where the supply chains within China are so obfuscated.
I mean, I know what that word, obfuscated. I can't say it.
Did I pronounce that wrong?
Opaque. Let's say opaque.
Okay. So the
Confused, mixed up,
the
hard to parse.
how can I where
You've
can I
got the
start
best
this
words,
from?
Chris.
I've got all the
Where
words.
can I start this from so
Oh,
that
no,
we can
this-
delete
no,
No,
this
we're
entire
recording
sec-
this entire thing.
No,
Okay.
it's too difficult for the video editor. There's nowhere to cut.
Fine. So, because the supply chains in China are so they have company after company after company to hide what's actually happening. A lot of companies are actually accidentally using prison labor without really knowing that that's where it's coming from.
Which is why they should just not work in China.
Yeah, I mean, or you contract to a factory
Yeah.
in China, right? And then they subcontract to another factory who subcontracts to another factory.
subcontract to Xinjiang.
And then somewhere along the way, there's a concentration camp, or even without the Uyghur issue, there are prisons.
Yeah.
So there are prisons where the forced labor is happening, and that's how you have, people finding notes from Chinese prisoners in their,
Walmart.
Halloween decorations. I think it was Kmart, but like,
Oh, yeah.
or they're, somebody found, when we interviewed Peter Humphrey, somebody found a note in a Christmas card from Tesco that was like, "We are Western prisoners being held in this prison that Peter Humphrey was in." He's like, "Please let Peter Humphrey know." Like, they named him in the note.
Wow.
So, it's just like, it's not just Xinjiang, it's not just the concentration camps, but there's a massive problem with slave labor throughout the Chinese supply chain, especially for these really low kind of tech things. Like, your iPhone's not going to be made by prison labor, but your Homer Simpson, your Homer Simpson slippers, your Christmas lights.
And raw materials, too.
Yeah, that's true too.
And
I mean, we met a guy who actually was forced to make Homer Simpson slippers in like a slave labor camp.
Yes, that
yeah.
is where I got that very specific example.
Yeah. It just makes me wonder, like, how do people like that Australian politician, Shaukat Mosselmain, who was just, wrapped up in like a international espionage investigation and he's been praising China. Like, how do people like that sleep at night?
It's the happy Tibetan ploy. It's like you bring them to China, you give them the tour that's completely stage managed. You awe them with how great like Shanghai is or Beijing is, and oh, look at the high-speed trains. Everybody's so happy,
Everyone's happy.
I mean, they say you judge a country by the hotel you stay in,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot to that.
I hear there are some great hotels in East Turkestan.
Oh yeah.
Hey, let's go. And with that, thanks for watching China Unscripted. Be sure to check out China Unscripted on the YouTube channel where we have this nice video. If you're already watching this video, hey, thanks. And leave your comments below what you think about what's happening in Xinjiang, East Turkestan. And yeah, once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganejda.
We'll talk to you next time.